first session expert sir, that is Nitin Kale sir. He has done MTech from VNIT Nagpur in 1990. He has completed his PhD from Electrical Engineering Department at IIT Bombay in 2007. He has also worked as a principal engineer at Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company for 32 nanometer high-K metal gate project during 2007 to 2009. He has been manager at IIT Bombay for nano manufacturing facility in 2009. He has co-founded NanoSniff Technology in June 2011. He is working as its chief technology officer. In this role, he is responsible for the R&D in the area of fabricating micro cantilever sensors, microheaters, and developing instruments for detecting proteins, cardiac markers, and antibodies. He has also developed several MEMS products, which includes Omniscan and Omnicant Bio. MEMS devices like piezo-resistive micro cantilevers, microheaters with IDE. He has demonstrated the proof of concept of detecting cardiac proteins using piezo-resistive microcantilevers, ultra-sensitive electronics, and a custom-made liquid cell. So we welcome you, sir. Today he is delivering his expertise on the topic MEMS-based sensor for chemical and biochemical sensing application. Welcome you, sir.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak at this event. So I'll have the video on for maybe a minute or two, and I'll also now share my presentation again, and then we can start with the talk. So thanks once again for the introduction and for having me here. So is something visible?
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay, but I'm not able to make it full screen.
F5, so press F5.
Is it now full screen? No, actually, I'll do one thing. I'll just re-log in. I think there is some issue. Just re-log in.
Sir, maybe you have to just at the bottom side on the right corner, at 70% was mentioned. Beside that, there is a point. So you have to just click that point.
Understood. But the issue was I was not able to get the controls itself. So I'll just leave the meeting and rejoin.
Okay,
fine. So now it is full screen and it is visible properly.
Yeah. So the talk today is on microsensors and instrumentation that we have developed for chemical and biochemical sensing.
Sir, you are muted.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just trying to change my slides, and there is some issue again coming. The slide is not changing, right?
Oh.
Okay. Is it changing now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, it is changing.
I use the mouse there. Okay. So NanoSniff is a company that was incubated at IIT Bombay, and we essentially work in the area of MEMS, nanoscience, and nanotechnology. So in my current, in this talk, I'll discuss a little bit about MEMS sensors and actuators that are generally available in the market. Maybe I will touch a little bit on nanofabrication technology. I'll discuss about the devices that NanoSniff is making, particularly micro cantilevers and micro heaters, and our applications and products for explosives detection, and some other products such as Omnicant and Sensing. So in our company, we have people who are good at sensor design, nanofabrication. We do some amount of coatings and surface functionalization also, chemical coatings, a good amount of biochemical processing. And we have a team of embedded systems people who do hardware, software, code design, etc. We were funded by angel investors, and then we also raised some equity in the past. And we also won a lot of grants. So just to have some perspective of what we are trying to discuss. So, we have objects, and objects have sizes. So you could have objects that are of the macro scale in meters. You could have objects of the meso scale. When I say meso scale, these are objects that we generally handle with our hands. Let's say grains of rice or grains of sand, typically in millimeter sizes. And then you have objects at the micro scale, which are observed under a microscope, for example, bacteria. And eventually you have the nanoscale objects, for example, viruses, the nuclei inside the cell. And for some reason, and for one particular reason, I've put the word transistors. And the reason for that is that although each MOSFET, so I'm sure that we are all aware of MOSFET, but each MOSFET is not exactly nanometer scale, but the gate length of the MOSFET is of the nanometer scale. In fact, it has been of the nanometer scale for about 2 decades now. I think the 90 nanometer node was introduced in about 2002 or 2003. So that's 18, 19 years. And that is the smallest fabricatable part that we machine. So we actually use lithography, etc., and etching to essentially make or fabricate the gate length. In fact, the entire transistor. But this gate length today is of the order of about 5 nanometers. And so we definitely are fully in the nanoscale regime, fully embedded in the nanoscale regime today. The reason why we have gone to the nanoscale is to exploit certain forces and certain properties that happen at the nanoscale. For example, we should also understand that devices and materials behave quite differently at the nanoscale. For example, if you consider the gravitational forces and the electromagnetic forces, then we know that gravitational force is proportional to the product of the mass. And electrical force, for example, Coulomb's force, is proportional to the product of the charges. Now, if you make the size small, the gravitational force is going to be much, much smaller. However, if you have designed your object in a certain way, then it can hold a huge amount of charge. So the point that I was trying to say is that at the nanoscale, it is the electromagnetic forces that dominate. and the effect of bulk is actually dramatically reduced. Bulk means what is there inside in terms of weight of that object. Just to take you back to again devices and to take you back to transistors, we know that typically dielectrics are known to be insulators. They do not conduct. However, if the dielectric is too thin, like the gate dielectric of say about 10 or 12 years back, when silicon dioxide was the gate dielectric and people had scaled down the transistor to such a level that now the gate dielectric thickness was just about 1.5 nanometers or so. Now at that thickness, the gate dielectric did not behave as an insulator. It started conducting, and that conducting was, and that current conduction was because of the tunneling, the process of tunneling, which is now a quantum mechanical behavior. So at the nanoscale, that is how, or that is the tool that you need to describe the phenomena that is happening. You have a huge amount of surface area as compared to the volume at the nanoscale. And you can actually, I would suggest you to work that out, how the surface area is at the nanoscale increases in terms of the ratio of its volume. And finally, this is one picture that you would have seen. So these are what are called as colors of nano gold. What happens is that, or what happens inside this is that people have crushed nanoparticles of gold, and we know that bulk gold is having a yellow color. It's called the yellow metal. However, if you crush it to nanometer scale, maybe a few tens of nanometers, and if you suspend it in a solution as a colloid, then you get different colored solutions. What it is trying to tell us and everybody is that the optical properties can be tailored at the nanoscale. In a similar fashion, a lot of other properties, electrical, thermal, etc., also can be tailored at the nanoscale. So as I talked, as I was coming to the surface to volume concept, here is a picture. So this is a cube that is 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter. So it's having a certain volume, and it is having a certain surface area, which is 6 meters square. Now, if you divide it into 8 parts, if you half it in all axes, then the volume remains the same, but the inner surfaces are exposed. Okay, so the surface area increases. You go on doing that, the volume still will remain the same, and the surface area is going to exponentially increase. What it tells us is that at the nanoscale, it is the surface property or the surface behavior which is more important than what is there, than the bulk or than the weight of that particular object. Okay, I'll skip the nanotechnology old new part. Again, as engineers, we know, particularly who are doing VLSI, know that because of scaling, there are certain advantages in terms of speed, in terms of power, etc., etc. So as you make things smaller, I'll just take you to this example. Let's say frequency, which scales down as 1 by L. What we are trying to say here is that the resonant frequency of an object is going to increase if the object size is small. And if you remember your tuning fork experiment, which you would have done somewhere in 11th or 12th, where you stuck a tuning fork and heard the sound. Now, if you have used tuning forks of different lengths, keeping the other dimension same, then you would find the change in sound. That is precisely the case which happens with micro or MEMS devices. Their resonant frequency dramatically increases, which is again a property that people exploit in RF switches. This is about volumes. So since we have COVID going around the entire country, we know how important it is to do testing. Typically, 1 liter of volume is the milk pouch that you get at home, about 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. Now, what happens is that if you scale it down by 10, 1 centimeter by centimeter by 1 centimeter, and that is 1 milliliter. If you further scale it down, 1 mm by 1 mm by 1 mm, that becomes a microliter. You go on scaling down, you will get to know, what the numbers are. The point is that if, let's say, you're doing a blood test, and typically, the blood drawn during a blood test is about 4 to 5 milliliters. For lots of young people in the group or in the stock, 5 milliliters is nothing. They can give, even half a liter if required for a blood test. However, for, as you go older people, for them, to puncture them, drawing blood, so much of blood, 5 ml, it's a huge issue for sick people, particularly for older people. So what if the idea is, what if the entire pathology laboratory can be constructed on a chip, and that is the idea of lab on chip. There is a famous journal for that, right? So now, whatever you are doing with a liter or a couple of milliliters, you could do the same thing with a few microliters, and that changes the ball game entirely. So MEMS, or micro electromechanical systems, is a term which tells a lot of things to us. It tells micro, so the scale or the size of the active device or the active part of the device. It's in the micro scale. Electro talks about the electrical, of course, and of course magnetics as well. Mechanical means there is something that moves, and it's a system. It has different names in different parts of the world as well. So this is an old slide. However, what I'm trying to show here is that MEMS is, I would say, a multi-million-dollar market today. In fact, if you take into consideration the huge number of sensors that are put into automotives today, then it's a market of several billions. This is the slide that depicts that. I think I should change this slide and get something up to 2021. What are the latest numbers? Now, if you look at a mobile phone, you will see dozens of MEMS sensors. For example, accelerometers, gyroscopes, or sort of electronic compass that we have. You have microphones, you have the speaker phone, so everything, even the thing that is used for navigation. So all these are essentially MEMS devices, and then you have also oscillators inside for doing the clocking and the timing. So what I'm trying to say is that while people tend to focus on chips, computing chips or processors as we call it, or on memories, here is a very big market and a very big opportunity for all of us, students and engineers particularly, to delve into the MEMS market, into the sensors market. So at NanoSniff, we, as I said, work on micro cantilevers and micro heaters. I'll quickly tell you what micro cantilevers are. What you see in this image is a device which is having a certain length, width, and thickness. Let's say it's made up of a certain material, having its own material properties, density, Young's modulus, etc. What you see here is that the thickness of this cantilever part, it is hinged here and it is free here. So this cantilever part is having a length and the width which is much, much greater than the thickness. Okay. And because of this, a lot of interesting phenomena happen. So what is that phenomenon? I'll start with the resonant frequency. We know that all cantilevers are going to resonate. All mechanical objects have a certain resonant frequency. But let's say a certain mass is adsorbed onto the microcantilever. Now, if you remember your 11th standard physics, you will also recall that the resonant frequency is also a function of the mass. So the resonant frequency is going to change. What it now tells you is that this can be used as a weighing balance, although maybe at a micro and or a nano scale. Okay. Similarly, we know that chemical reactions are, endothermic or exothermic. Let us say you have a cantilever made up of different materials, say material 1 and material 2, and you have a chemical reaction happening, which could be exothermic or endothermic. Now, these two materials can be chosen to have different temperature coefficients of expansion. So because of the change in temperature and because of the different temperature coefficients of expansion, these two layers will undergo a dimension change. But since they are fixed here, they cannot change as per their nature. So it's going to either move up or it's going to move down. Now this movement upwards or downwards tells you that there is a temperature change. So this becomes a thermometer, although you cannot use to measure your body temperature, let's say. But if there is a chemical reaction and there is a change of, let's say, 1/100th of a degree Celsius, you can measure it with these cantilevers. The other thing is, this is the property that we actually exploit. We look at changes in the surface stress. So how this happens. So let us say you have a cantilever and you have stuck it with what are called as antibodies. We all know antibodies today because of COVID. And let us assume that we have antibodies to the coronavirus thing. Okay, and these have in some way they have been what is called as immobilized on the surface of the cantilever. And let us say you are trying to test a patient, and the patient's blood or something is drawn, some sample is drawn, where you suspect, where you think that the antigens, that is the coronavirus, will be present, and you do a infusion. Now, if the coronavirus particles are present, they will selectively bind with their antibodies, because this is what nature dictates. Antibodies and its binding with the antigens is highly selective. Now, in case the binding happens, the surface energy here changes, the surface stress changes, because of which the cantilever goes upwards or it could go downward. Mind you, this is not a change because of weight. It is a change because of change in surface energy. So, because of the change in surface energy, this cantilever bending is happening. And what is interesting is now, if you can find a way to determine if the cantilever has bent, then you can actually use this as a biosensor. So that is some activity that we have done. Okay, I'll just skip this slide, these slides, because we may run short of time. In terms of detection, you could have an optical detection for the cantilevers. You shine a laser, you collect it using an array of photosensitive diodes, and then you check, how much is the current and which diode is particularly lighting up to determine how much the cantilever is bent. Or you could use a piezoresistive layer and you could embed it inside the cantilever. Now, if the cantilever bends, the piezoresistive layer is going to experience a certain amount of strain. And if it experiences a strain, then its resistance will change. So if you have your contact pads and if you have your electronics that can pick up the change in resistance, then you have a point of care instrument that you can put in a laboratory. So this is again something that we have worked on. Okay, now very quickly I'll go through these slides. you need materials to make your cantilevers. So here is a instrument that yields me or gives me the materials required to make cantilevers. For example, I need thin films of silicon nitride or polycrystalline silicon. Now, so what these materials are, discussing them actually requires a different kind of a talk. We can have that at some other time. Once you have your materials, you wish to characterize them. You wish to know whether you have the same material that you actually wanted. So if you have, let's say, silicon nitride, you do a FTIR spectroscopy and see if the bond, the signatures actually indicate that you have a SIN kind of a bond. Since we wanted to make micro cantilevers, so what you can see here is a micro cantilever that is suspended. This is in silicon nitride. It is hinged here on a silicon substrate, and the substrate, we have dug a pit in the substrate so that this film is now freestanding. You can also see that there are no pinholes or anything in the film. Some more characterizations that we do or we did with the films. This is actually a part of my PhD. We found out what is the grain size. We found out what is the orientation of the polycrystalline silicon. What is its electrical property, for example, what is the resistivity, what is the density, what is the crystallinity of the film, how much % of it is crystalline, and how is the surface morphology. So there are various techniques and various tools of material characterization. For example, this is with XRD, this is with Raman spectroscopy, and this is with the atomic force microscope. We also did simulations. You would have, I'm sure, done a lot of simulations. So essentially, you generate a solid model, you mesh the active parts, you apply the boundary conditions, you check or you tune the simulator, after supplying all the material properties, whether it's working fine or not. And then, you can do a lot of characterizations of this type. I would say, simulations of this type, where let's say, you bend it and see what is the change in resistance, or you pull it in this direction, which typically happens with antibody antigen binding, and see what is the change. Okay. Now let me move to the design of cantilevers part of it. So, we had fabricated certain cantilevers, but before that we did some simulations and determined what was the thickness. And then we went on to fabricate the device. So this is again the process. Now, those who are aware of nanofabrication processes will recall that in a fabrication process, you would typically have a silicon wafer, and you will have a lot of deposition steps, like let's say oxidation or thin film deposition. Then you have what are called as lithography steps, where you try to define the patterns which should be present using a photolithographic mask. And then finally, you do etching, and then again, cleaning and deposition of the next layer. So this cycle is repeated. And what I have depicted in this particular figure is a step, a series of steps in which thin films were deposited, patterned, and etched on the silicon wafer. And finally, one important part of MEMS device, as I said, that since the component parts have to move, they should have some sort of a degree of freedom. They cannot remain a part of the substrate. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a table, and on the table you have, using Fevicol, you have stuck sun mica. Now the sun mica and the table are exactly stuck. The sun mica cannot move. But if you cut a certain part of the table, which is having the sun mica, and if you keep the sun mica intact, then the sun mica can move. Because it's a thin layer. You apply a bit of force, it can. So that is something that you need to do. So this is what I have tried to depict here. So this is the cantilever. single cantilever. This is very thin, about 1 micron or so. And this is connected to the base. So the base is very thick. So this base part would be something like, 300 microns or so. This is the entire die. So what you see here are the micro cantilevers. So these are the micro cantilevers. And these are the contact pads. So you have a conductive layer, electrically conductive layer, which goes through the cantilever, and you can probe it using these contact pads. So that's the idea for electrical characterization. So we did some sort of a mechanical characterization first. You bend the cantilever that you have fabricated with a cantilever whose mechanical properties are known. And in a cantilever, what do you need to find out? You need to find out mainly its stiffness or the spring constant, and you need to find out its resonant frequency. So these are two important properties. Now to find the stiffness, you bend your cantilever with a cantilever whose resistance is known. So this forms two springs in series, and that is similar to two resistances in parallel. So if you know one, and if you know the combination, the value of the combination, then you can find the unknown. And you can do these measurements in what is called as a atomic force microscope setup. This is, for example, all the characterization that we did. And then we determined, the stiffness of our device, which was very close to the value that we had simulated. We also measured the resonant frequency in the atomic force microscope setup itself. And we also did electrical characterization. You bend the cantilever in a calibrated manner using what is called as a probe station apparatus. And you have your entire electronics that is trying to measure the resistance in real time. And you find out if there is a change in resistance or not as you deflect the cantilever. So that is again something that we had observed. So these are the cantilever devices that we make these days. The color in brown that you see here is the polycrystalline layer, and this transparent part that you see, this part at the edges that you see, this is either silicon nitride or silicon dioxide. Okay, so this is again the fabrication process. I'll not get into it. One important thing when you are depositing layers upon layers upon layers is that these layers have built-in stresses. Anyone who has observed a painting job would recall or would remember that after a couple of years or maybe after a couple of months, in fact, if it's a bad job, the layers tend to peel off. And this is because the surface work was not done properly. And other reason is, of course, you have multiple layers of paints, you have putty, etc. You have the surface also. So everything has a built-in stress or sort of a residual stress. And in case, you have not deposited the films correctly, you'll have cantilevers which are curled in so horrible a fashion. Now straightening them requires certain techniques. So we have gone through them, and now we get reasonably straight devices. Okay, now comes the application part. Why did we make these devices? Yeah, so as I said, so Nanosniff was a company that is interested in detecting explosives. Explosives, for example, RDX, TNT, PET, and etc. And the problem with explosives is that explosives have a very low vapor pressure. You cannot smell them at room temperature because very few molecules come out of the bulk explosive. So one needs some sort of a very sensitive nose. The dogs have a sensitive nose, but we need to have a electronic nose which can be deployed at public places. So what we did is, with the help of the cantilevers and with a certain principle, the surface stress principle, we said, okay, let's do it this way. Let us coat the cantilever with a coating which has an affinity or a liking to those vapor molecules. Now, if you expose your cantilever to air, which is having those vapor molecules, then the vapor molecules will preferentially bind with the cantilever surface or with the cantilever coating, the coating that you have covered. And because of the binding, there will be a bending, and because of the bending, you will see a change in resistance. Now, if you can pick up the change in resistance, your job is done. So that is something that we started working on. We developed a prototype, which you can see here, of a explosive detector. So what this prototype had inside is it had a small flow cell, gas flow cell, which held the micro cantilever device, and it also had the entire electronics, which was monitoring the resistance of the cantilever in real time. It had a pump which was doing the suction. So air was being sucked from the outside and it was being delivered to the flow cell. And the resistance of the cantilevers was also monitored. So what happened is that whenever we exposed it to vapors of RDX or TNT or PTN, we could see a change in resistance. Okay. Now, and this was very sensitive, as you can see. However, with sensors, it is not just sensitivity that is important. Even selectivity is important. So what is the selectivity problem? And the selectivity problem was that, whenever we exposed our device to vapors of, let's say, shoe polish or certain creams or certain fragrances, perfumes, for example. So we could see similar signals. So there was an issue with the selectivity. Now that is a killer, right? So at NanoSniff, we had to actually abandon our technology of using cantilevers to detect explosives. Because, the coating has a chemical affinity with the molecules. And many of these molecules that are present in perfumes and shoe polish, etc., have the same molecular base. Right? So the selectivity problem arose. So we said, okay, we'll need to change the strategy. So from a chemistry approach, we move to a physical approach or a physics approach. The idea is let us use micro hot plates or micro heaters. Now, if you look at this device, you will see a membrane. So this thing that looks translucent, that's a membrane. You will see one zigzag coil, that is the heater. You will see another zigzag, that is the temperature sensor. And that is a micro hot plate with temperature sensor. The width of the heating coil is very small, about 10 micrometers. And the thickness of this entire stack is again very small, a few hundred nanometers. So it has a very low thermal mass, because of which it rapidly heats and rapidly cools down. For example, this micro heater will will heat from room temperature to say 500 degrees Celsius in a few milliseconds, and it cools down equally fast. Now, our approach for detecting explosives is what is called as deflagration. So if you introduce a small quantity of explosive and if you can place it on the membrane, so we have a method for doing that. And then if you apply a large pulse, if you pulse the voltage, when I say large pulse, I am trying to tell you that a pulse that is taking the temperature to about 500 degrees Celsius, then the explosive present on the membrane is going to undergo a micro explosion because it sees a thermal shock. And because of the micro explosion, you will see a temperature change. And you have a temperature sensor already. Right? So this temperature you can see is now doing a measurement of temperature, which is independent in real time and which is in situ. Okay, so that's the kind of beauty of this device. So, and if you can now pick up the change in temperature, your job is done. So that's the physics of it. Now I will show a small video of how the micro heater works when you apply it a voltage. So you can see that it heats up. It is being driven by a low frequency sine wave so that we can capture the slowly heating part. You can also drive it with a high frequency sine wave. I just repeat. I just repeat playing it. So this is a low frequency sine wave, mind you. Okay. I think the videos play for a small time, so we may have some issue later on. But anyways, so what happens is that you see a signal, a temperature signal of this sort if the sample that you had tested was RDX. If it is a non-explosive, which is let's say salt, sugar, etc., then you see a sample, you see a signal which is something like this. However, it's not so black and white. There are lots of elements of gray as well. But we have now developed some very intelligent algorithms uh, based on statistics, based on signal processing, based on neural networks that can actually sift through the data and can determine with the help of the features that we extract whether the signal is coming or the sample that we have tested is an explosive or it's a non-explosive. So after working for several years, we developed this product. This is called as Nano Sniffer. We actually introduced it in the market last year, but then because of COVID, we could not do much demos. So now we have in the last month, I think, in the last month we have started demonstrating this product to various security agencies. So it can detect less than 10 nanograms. The false positive is less than 3%. It purges within a minute, detects within 8 to 10 seconds. It can work at even, at 55 degrees Celsius. I think Surat goes to about 43, 44. It can very easily work there. It's portable, it has visible and audio alarms, etc. And it's powered by a battery. So I'll just play this video again. I hope this video at least plays the full video. Otherwise, so what the operator now does is she inserts a swab, which is a blank swab, into the instrument. And she runs the instrument. And now the microheater is testing the swab. And in a couple of seconds, you see a message here in green color saying traces not detected. Yeah, so this is that message. Now she will insert another swab, which is having 10 nanograms of RDX. And in about 8 to 10 seconds, you will see a message here in red color saying traces detected. And you will also hear a beep. So I think if you're lucky, you might have heard the beep as well. So can you just on chat or something, can you just message if you heard the beep? I also want to play it once again, just for the audience. Okay, so I got messages that they couldn't hear the beep. Anyway, so it's just a matter of triggering a alarm or a buzzer. Yeah, yeah. So this is for the security agencies. Now, when you develop a product, it's important that you test it against a certain benchmark. So we have tested NanoSniffer using the ASTM standard, which is, I think, also used by the TSA. So what they basically do is they have a class of explosives that should be detected. At least one of them should be detected, in the testing process. And they have a certain background material, the background challenge material they call it. So which are basically non-explosive. So you can select any one of them. And you have to have a certain number of tests that you carry out. Let's say 25 tests. Out of them, if you fail two, that's fine. You can still go ahead, something like that. And then they look at what is the collection area on the swab, and eventually, they calculate what is the score. So we followed that same thing for our testing. It is important that since we are doing what is called as trace detection and not vapor detection, we need to sample from surfaces. So various surfaces like skin, human skin, bags, bag handles, the boot. These are the materials. You could have plastics, nylon, or rubber. So all those materials also need to be tested. So that's one important. Uh, so what we had done is, we had essentially used serial dilution as the process of measuring the explosive and then trying to introduce it to our instrument. And we had tested, different surfaces. So, for example, Teflon, aluminum, glass, etc. We tested lots of commonly used items. For example, water itself, water vapor, deos, soaps, cooking oil, petrol, shoe polish, lots of these things. And of course, by doing all this, we could generate a good database so that whenever we compute features, we can always compare with all these databases. The other important thing, in terms of science-wise, is knowledge of what surface you are collecting, what explosive you are trying to handle, detect, and what is the swab material. That is also important because the adhesion of the explosive particle with the surfaces could be of variety of forces. You could have van der Waals force or electrostatic, etc., etc. However, what basically happens is that when you do swiping, you use a swab to swipe from a surface. This is not different from what happens during skiing. In skiing on ice, you place your foot or the ski, and what happens is that because of the pressure, the ice gets converted, in bulk form, it gets converted into microspheres, and essentially you are doing a skiing, or you essentially roll on the microspheres. So, what is the collection efficiency of the swab? That is also important. So, we need to test several swab materials. As I said, we have tested it at high temperatures, 55 degrees Celsius as well. So here is our instrument, and here is a box which is having some lamps inside, lots of temperature sensors inside, a couple of small fans as well, and we do the characterization. And of course, there is a way to insert the swab when the instrument is inside. We, of course, after doing lab testing, you also need to do field testing. Here is an example, field testing, which we did at the main gate of IIT Bombay. Just quick. So this is the process of swabbing. This can be done on the hands. This can be done on the handles of the bag, or it can be done on your steering wheel. Yeah. Okay. So this is nano sniffer, which we have started to demonstrate. I'll now shift gears and come back to some work that we did on cantilevers, but in a different direction. Now, this work was essentially to detect what are called as cardiac markers. So we all know that heart disease is a global problem, and it's now becoming it has already actually become a very serious problem in India, where even the young population is getting affected by heart disease. In case of a heart attack, the doctors that face a very peculiar problem. They want that it should be detected in the early stage. Because if you treat it at the golden hour, within the golden hour, let's say 1 to 2 hours after the pain has started, then the damage to the heart muscle can be substantially controlled or diminished or reduced. However, many of the symptoms of a heart attack can be very easily confused with something else. For example, you might have had a bad lunch, because of which you are having gas, because of which you are having a chest pain or a muscular pain. Mostly, in fact, they say in 50% of the cases, it does not show up in ECG. And these are called as non-STEMI attacks. So for a doctor, it is very important to have some indication or some instrument that gives us an idea whether the person that is coming to you is actually undergoing a heart attack. The golden standard for doctors is to test for a cardiac marker, which is called as troponin or cardiac troponin. However, what happens is that the test for cardiac troponin, which is a reliable test, is generally carried out in pathology laboratories. There are some tests which are called as TROP-T, but they have, kind of 40%, 50% false positives. So typically doctors do not rely on that. Now, the situation is that if a person comes and with a chest pain and the blood sample is drawn, then a lot of time is lost in collection, transportation, testing, and dissemination of the test results. Easily 4 to 6 hours. Now, in a place like Mumbai, there could be several such centers, but then the traffic conditions are such that you can still lose 4 to 6 hours. So there is a need for a smart and inexpensive point of care instrument that can rapidly detect myocardial infarction by detecting the cardiac markers, the cardiac proteins. So these are some of the examples of cardiac proteins: myoglobin, troponin, CKMB, etc. CKMB is an enzyme, anyway, sorry. Or heart fatty acid binding protein, HFAB. And these are typically their numbers. And there are some that are early markers, some that are late markers. So the idea with which we worked was something like this. That again, because of COVID, we all know antibodies. So these are depicted to have a Y-shaped structure in textbooks. This part is common. This part, and this part is different for different antibodies, and the shape actually is determined by what target it wants to capture, and this is highly specific. So as I said, that we immobilize through a chemical method. This is a patented process. We have a US patent on this on the cantilever surface, and then if we have cardiac markers, then they can bind to the protein, the antibodies that we had immobilized. And because of the binding, there is a bending, and the bending can be detected using electronics. So what we did is we first did what is called as surface testing of whether you actually are able to do the antibody antigen binding. Okay, so this was done using fluorescent antibodies as well. The secondary antibody was fluorescent tag. And then some of our colleagues, long time back at IIT Bombay, they had tested it with myoglobin and with normal IgG kind of proteins. Optically, this was detected or using an atomic force microscope. Later on at NanoSniff, we built a nice setup. This is similar to a setup that is present at SVNIT Surat. Professor Darji has this setup, and they had used it for detecting heavy metal ions. In fact, one of his student, Dinesh Rotke, has done considerable amount of work in that area and has published papers, and lots of papers, I would say, I think about half a dozen or so in reputed journals. So what you have here is, these are the cantilevers, and this is the cantilever die that is stuck on a PCB, and you have connections that are coming from the die to the PCB, and then you have a electronic connector here, the connector here. This connector helps you to interface the cantilever with your high sensitivity electronics, which is monitoring the cantilever in real time, the resistance of the cantilever in real time. You have a syringe pump, in fact, two syringe, I would say a single syringe pump, but that can handle 2 syringes. You push in PBS solution from here. PBS is your control solution. And from here, you push in your antigen solution. So first you do what is called as equilibration. You flush it for about, say, half an hour or so. And then you introduce the liquid that is having the antigen of interest. So what basically happens is that first it stabilizes, then you inject your antigen. After some time, it reaches the cantilevers, and then binding, bending, etc. happens, and you see a change in resistance. So this was an indication that we could detect antibodies using our microcantilevers. Now, what we had also done is so we had presented our devices, microcantilevers and microheaters, at various places in India. The instrument that you just saw also came out of that process. And people wanted to actually use cantilevers for detecting certain volatile organic compounds. And they wanted to test whether their concept works or not. So we said, okay, we will, kind of use our own electronics and make an instrument which will permit or which will empower people to do what is called as headspace analysis. Now, headspace is, let's say you have a vial and you have a chemical inside. So whatever space is present above the chemical and below the lid is your headspace. So the vapors get connected here. So these are the vapors that we are interested in transferring to the cantilevers. Now, what is that instrument? We call it OmniCan. The instrument looks like this. What you can see here is the cantilever PCB. So here is the cantilever attached on it and the connector. This connector can be fitted on another connector on the electronic side of it. And here is the mechanical fitment. So what happens is that you have a vial which is having the volatile compound of interest. This can be heated. So there is a heater beneath. You can control the temperature. And there is a mass flow controller inside. So using a carrier gas, you can bring the carrier gas into the vial, and you can take away the vapors and you can bring it to this chamber. Now this chamber is having your cantilever. Inside this thing, you have the cantilever. Now, again, this is that experiment that we had done. And this was the very first experiment, close to about 9 years now. And the reason I show this slide is that we got everything right the very first time. So as you change the flow rate, the cantilever dips, or it shows a change in resistance. So it's also a sort of a flow rate sensor, mind you. You introduce acetone vapors, the resistance changes. You remove acetone vapors, the resistance changes. So the cantilever is responding, or its coating is responding to the vapors. Now you can see a drift here. This is the drift in electronics. Now this has been straightened out, because very immediately we realize that there is a drift and it has been straightened. So you can do huge number of experiments in your laboratory with OmniCant. For example, you can change the coating on the cantilever. You can change the volatile organic compound. You can change the temperature of the holder of your volatile compound. You can change the temperature of the reaction chamber in which the cantilever is present. You can change the flow rate of the carrier. Yes. You can do hundreds of experiments. And there are some people who bought this instrument and also published papers with the help of OmniCant. The next instrumentation is for microheaters. So again, if I give you a microheater, what do you do with it? So this instrumentation, although I have put iSense here, but it's called as Sensimer. This helps. In fact, the capability of the instrument is to, of course, interface with the microheater and measure its temperature, but it gives voltage of different types. So you can give a pulse, you can give a square wave, you can give a triangular wave or a sinusoidal wave, and you can do a measurement of temperature in real time. And you can have PC connection to store the data as well. So this is with this, you can find out the rising time or the fall time of the microheater, the MEMS devices. We made this device. This is a microheater with interdigitated electrodes. And this was made for IIST Trivandrum. That's the Space Science Research Institute, which was founded by ISRO. And they wanted to use it for, I think, either ammonia detection or hydrogen detection. So I don't remember that. We also make cantilever dies that are having 8K cantilevers, for example. So these are some very straight cantilevers that you can see. Very recently, we fabricated a new kind of beam structure. Now this is microheaters with temperature sensor and with interdigitated electrodes. So I'll explain you. This purple thing that you see is the beam. And on the top and the bottom, there are transparent beams, by the way. What you see here, so this part is the heater part. This is the temperature sensor part. And so these are the interdigitated electrodes. We have put metal oxide on that. Metal oxide is, let's say, can have aluminum oxide, for example, or tin oxide. Now this metal oxide has a property that it is sensitive to certain or to many of the toxic gases. For example, H2S, SO2, etc., etc. So we want to see if we can make a gas sensor out of it. You need to heat the microheater at a certain temperature, and you need to monitor the change in resistance of the metal oxide. So that is something that we are now experimenting. So we have a now control on the entire process to make these devices as well. This is our team. Coming to almost the end of my talk. This is our team. Kapil, he looks after the business. Dipali, she looks after the electronics. On a system level side, I would say, she also looks after the algorithms, development of the algorithms. Dr. Sachin Sangve, he looks after the fabrication of the devices. Rishikesh does the software and embedded systems. Nitin Mali does the hardware. Abhishek, he does the testing. So at Nanosniff, we do a little bit of fun as well. You'll remember that in our Nanosniffer instrument, we have to press a lever. which also comes back. So there is a spring. Now this spring is going to be operated, tens of thousands of times. So how does one test the reliability of the spring? So one way is, you employ a person and he will do the bending and do the counting how many times he has bent it. Another way is to use a toy and make the toy to bend the device or to bend the lever. And you can, of course, drive the toy, something like this. Now this fellow can do it for 30,000 times, 50,000 times, no problem. Okay, so this I think is my last slide. This is Pasteur's quadrant, which says that we're looking at a path which is in which the goals are applied or are of an applied nature, not the fundamental or the pure nature, but still it is not inherently opposed with scientific creativity and rigor. Now this Pasteur's quadrant comes from a book by Donald Stokes published in 1997. It essentially maps knowledge creation and knowledge utilization. So you can see the four rectangles, or the four quadrants. The first approach is that of Socrates, the famous philosopher, which is teaching-oriented research. The thing is that in this approach, the knowledge utilization and the knowledge creation is both low. The next approach was adopted by Edison, that is pure applied research. Knowledge utilization here is very high. I'll explain how it is, but the knowledge creation is low. Now, Edison, we know, invented the bulb, and it is said that he did about 40,000 experiments to determine the material, tungsten, of which the filament should be made. Now, this is an example that we tell our students to show them, how important it is to persist. But Edison's competitor was Tesla, who was an altogether brilliant man and with out-of-box thinking. So Tesla said, all these experiments could have been done and the material could have been found if the experiments were intelligently designed. And this could have been done in, say, half a dozen or a dozen of experiments. So knowledge creation was low. The third is pure basic research. So let's remind ourselves of Niels Bohr and the structure of atom. So huge amount of knowledge creation. He is known to be the sort of father of quantum mechanics that came out of his hydrogen atom model. But then utilization side, at least during his times, not of today's times, but in his times, the utilization was low. And the fourth is Louis Pasteur, that is use-inspired basic research. Stokes calls this as use-inspired basic research. Now, Louis Pasteur, we know, he was a chemist, mainly a chemist, if I recall, but who dabbled into biology. So one of the things that he observed was that milk goes bad when it's kept outside after a certain amount of time. He observed the milk under a microscope, the milk that went bad under a microscope, and he saw lots of active microbes. I'm not sure if they called them microbes in those days, but he realized that these were microbes and they were living objects. Now he knew that since they are living, they had to be made up of organic matter, and he could kill the living matter or the bacteria if he gives them a heat treatment, which he did. In those days, it was, I think, 65 degrees, 15 minutes. Later on, it became, boil the milk for about 15 seconds. Now, in this case, you can see that the knowledge creation was huge. Trying to understand that milk went bad because of bacteria. And then you had a treatment for it. And the knowledge utilization was also huge because everybody boils their milk today, right? There are many other examples, but I won't get into that. So in this approach, in Pasteur's approach, you choose a fundamentally new or novel phenomenon, uncover the basic science underlying it, and translate that knowledge into an application. So that's all. I am open for questions now.
Thank you, sir, for enlightening us how the knowledge creation and knowledge utilization is possible with Pasteur's quadrant concept. So I would like to invite participants. Is there any questions or query from your side? Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sir, you have talked about the stiffness and the resonant frequencies are very important parameters for cantilever. So, sir, can you highlight more about how to more tune up about resonant frequency?
Okay. So the resonant frequency mathematically is a function of the stiffness and the adsorbed mass, or the mass on it, or the mass of the cantilever. Now you can see that everything is inside that particular equation. I think it is F naught is equal to under root K by M. Okay, so the K is the stiffness and M is the mass. Now mass, is a function of the density and the size, right? So by density, you are going to choose the material. By size, you are going to kind of decide the geometry. If you look at the stiffness part of the equation, then the stiffness also depends on the material properties. Example, the Young's modulus, and it also depends upon the dimensions. Right. So by determining the material properties and the dimensions of your device, you can determine the tuning frequency, or the resonant frequency.
Okay. And one more question, that is, apart from explosive detection, can we have some another specific application where we can utilize our cantilevers? You have shown us that explosive detection.
Yeah. So, for example, it's good for volatile organic sensing, as I showed with Omnicant. With Omnicant and for detection of volatile organic compounds, let's say acetone or alcohols, you can use that.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for enlightening us for this field
there was
of
some question. There was some question in the chat.
Yes, sir. I just read for you.
Yeah, please.
Sir, it has been quoted that one of your slide is that measured millimeter indices. If so, how is that measured, and what is the significance of that in a fabrication and usage?
Okay, so I think that was in the XRD. So the XRD is going to tell us what the Miller indices are. And there is what is called as a standard JCPDS database. So in the XRD, you have your peak at certain 2 theta angle numbers in your numbers, and then you need to compare it with the JCPDS database. So that database, researchers over last 100 years after X-ray crystallography was invented, they have actually created that database. So using that, you can determine what your Miller indices are. Now, in terms of how it is useful, now that is a very hard question to answer. But for example, I'll give you a different okay, just let me remember. Yeah, so it is known that piezoresistivity or the coefficients tend to be higher. I'm not sure, I don't remember that thing now, if it's in the 111 configuration. But I'll need to, kind of recheck for that. The other thing, in terms of semiconductor processing, if you have 100 wafers, your channel is to, from the MEMS side of it, you can do what is called as etching using wet etching, for example, TMH, etc., because it sees very low, few number of atoms on that surface, and then the etch rates are typically very high. So those are certain advantages. In 100, if you see it from the top side for the CMOS, I believe they use it because it suffers, the charge carriers are going to suffer minimal collisions. So yeah, so it's important that Miller indices.
Okay, thank you. Any other question, participant?
There is one more question, Ketki madam, in a chat window.
Yeah. I think that I cannot visualize from.
Okay.
Okay, there's one question. Is there any application of MEMS in IoT and AI as a current industrial scenario? Any working example commercially available for industrial use?
Oh, yeah. For example, the thing that we are trying to do with the gas sensors is exactly the same. So using a micro heater ID and metal oxide device to work as a gas sensor. And of course, AI is going to be applied on the data that is generated. Right? You're going to generate signals of how the metal oxide behaves when it interacts with these toxic gases. Now, in terms of applications, you can use it in your vehicle's exhaust. I'm just giving one example. So anything else?
Sir, I'm having one general question, sir.
Yeah.
Hello, sir. We are working in more towards the processing of the signal. So whether the processing of signal is remain same in a case of at a nano level, or we need to care something extra while processing the nano signals?
No, when you say nano signals, what do you exactly mean?
Like you are more focusing towards the product development. Okay, so depending on the sensitivity of the product, the signal generated is changed, and based on that, we need to means how exactly the processing of the signal is done in the product development.
No, so I would say signal processing has standard instrumentation. I mean, you need to have a data acquisition system, right? It is going to have its own amplifiers, filters, A to D converters, D to A converters. So all that is not going to change. Yeah, what you can do is later on you can build a ASIC, some sort of an ASIC chip, which is dedicated for your application.
Okay, fine. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you very much for just. There is one more question. Is there? That is one makes a sensitive devices be more selective or constrained. That is very common or general question that Humsar is working in nano domain.
Could you please repeat? I didn't actually get
Sir,
it.
that question is how does one make such sensitive devices be more selective and constrained?
Oh, so well, first of all, it should be, I think, based on sound principle. That is important. And then to improve selectivity, you need to have, as I said, data generation and intelligent algorithms. So both these two things, sound science and good data analytics can help it in selectivity. The constrained part I did not understand. Constrained means what?
So Anmol Saxena, please unmute your mic and clarify your question, please. Constraint, what do you mean by constraint?
Okay, it doesn't overshoot. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, so you will need to do some, on the input range. On the input range, when you are looking at signals that are in microvolts, you don't have to worry about. You're looking at phenomena that is very small. Otherwise, you don't need electronic noses or sensors that work at the nanoscale. See, if you could have, if one could smell an explosive, you don't need an explosive detector. Just as you can smell a perfume.
I hope Anmol has been satisfied with the answer. Okay. So once again, thank you, sir. Question. Okay, last question. Yes. You may ask directly.
Yeah. Hi, Nitin sir.
Yeah. Fine.
So one last question is related to the MEMS devices, right? Like basically it's a electro and mechanical systems, right? So is there some application in the industry where like the existing like the things which we are using at a very large scale at an industry which is like a drilling and like digging and all that. So is there like application of MEMS in those kind of areas, like which are purely mechanical systems and need to be done at the nano level for like
yeah, for example, you have dip pen lithography. Okay, so essentially you dip your micro cantilever, in fact I would say the tip of the micro cantilever, in ink. Maybe it's a nano ink, I don't know. And then you write dots. And these dots are of the nanoscale. Or this can be used to what is called as do sort of scribing. Okay, if you want to make some scratches or if you want to make some, since you have used the word digging, it's in principle it is possible. You can do that.
No, but like if you talk about the quantum dots and all that, I think like when we are doing those kind of applications,
quantum dots will not come into this. Those are different devices.
No, but like how they will be getting fabricated. They would need these kind of instruments, right? Which will work at a nano level.
They will still need the basic semiconductor fabrication equipment.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So I think there is no query in chat also, as well as, so Ramya?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you
Ma'am, is my screen being shared?
Yes, it is shared.
Okay.
So thank you, Nitin sir, for enlightening us for this MEMS and nanotechnology domain. And from our team, we would like to present eMomento for your expert
Okay, sure. Thank you.
knowledge.
Sir, later on we'll
Thank you,
share
sir.
it.
Thank you very much.
Sir, later on we'll share it via mail, sir.
Okay.
Please accept virtually. Please accept
Sure.
virtually. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
And
Okay.
sir, one
Okay.
minute.
Have
We
a good
would
day.
like to invite Sir, 1 minute. We would like to take one group photo. So if every participants can just on their videos, we will have a snap clip. So
I request all the participants to kindly put your videos on.
Nitin sir, is it possible for you to share your email ID?
Yeah, sure. It's nitinsnifkale@nanosniff.com. I think the organizers also have my email.
We'll share. We have noted the presence of our next speaker, Dr. Anubha Gupta. Ma'am, hello. Kale's Nitin sir, she is from IIIT Delhi, Dr. Anubha Gupta.
Hello. Hi.
Hello, Dr. Kale.
Yeah, hi.
Teja ma'am, is it taken?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so yeah, bye bye everybody, and best luck
Bye-bye.
for the
Bye,
evening.
sir.
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Thank you, sir.